When COVID lockdowns hit the United States in early 2020, many industries were hit hard, and among them was the Disney Dream Machine. The way movies were being made and consumed was being changed for the better part of 2 years, if not forever. Marvel Studios was at its height just before the start of the pandemic. They were fresh off Endgame in 2019, which became the highest grossing film of all time. People were wondering how or if they could ever top it. And that's when the pandemic brought everything grinding to a halt, slowing and complicating production, and hitting the box office hard. This impact can be seen across all of Phase 4, from Black Widow having a day-and-date release on Disney+, causing actress Scarlett Johansson to threaten to sue Disney for loss of box office royalties. Or maybe another example is the generic third acts of many of the pandemic films, with rumors attributing this to the finales being worked on before even having a locked script, or sometimes even a director. This resulted in conclusions that feel out of tone and style from the rest of the film, as can be seen in Shang-Chi's out-of-nowhere kaiju conclusion to what is mostly a martial arts movie up until that point. Or maybe Black Widow's more grounded spy thriller having this bizarre overblown fight on this flying fortress that just came out of nowhere. One could blame a general dip in quality of the post-Endgame films to COVID issues, but that may be giving them maybe too much leeway. However, I don't think any film shows the issues of COVID filmmaking quite like Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. Now, the Ant-Man franchise was never the most prestigious in the MCU, but those films had their place as these fun, lighthearted comedy romps between the big events that served as something of a palate cleanser. The first few minutes of this film recaptures that tone again nicely, but quickly falls into kind of this mess of CGI corner cutting. In his third film, Peyton Reed is trying for something bigger, more expansive, to give Ant-Man his own big event film comparable to something like Iron Man, Thor, or Captain America. Yet despite those raised stakes, Quantumania still tries to hold on to a sense of comedic fun, as hit and miss as this franchise can often be with that. It certainly is ambitious, and I can respect that ambition, probably more than I respected the last movie in the franchise, which played it very, very safe. That second entry kinda just spent most of its time cracking jokes between a game of hot potato with a shrunken lab. As a film shot during COVID, though, Reed's attempts to grow this franchise beyond its quaint comedic roots may have been ill-timed. The movie follows Ant-Man, who has been slacking on his hero duties in favor of writing his own puff-piece biographies. When his daughter Cassie unintentionally sends signals to the warlord Kang in the quantum realm, they are shrunken down and pulled into his world. Kang attempts to coerce the family into freeing him from the quantum realm so he can then continue his war across the multiverse. They don't really spend much time getting to the meat of the story and are rushed into the quantum realm within the first 10 minutes or so of the movie. And this is where the COVID filmmaking style becomes blatantly apparent. Everything, and I mean everything, seems to be shot on a small soundstage where the actors stiffly stand on their marks and read their lines. Blocking in general on these Hollywood CGI-heavy films has been taking a hit in the recent years for a while, but here I think we're starting to see it get a little ridiculous. I read reports that this film was made using The Mandalorian's volume, but where that show manages to create a great illusion of space and setting, here it just looks like the actors are on this limited warehouse panorama and told to stand perfectly still and just stare up with their mouths open so that they don't do anything to make the effects artist's job more difficult than it already is. And the biggest issue is, once I noticed it, it was all I could see. It's seeing the man behind the curtain in every single set piece. As a result, Quantumania's narrative, it goes in this repetitive series of events. Stand and listen to exposition, tell a joke, run from blob of CGI, and repeat. If I was to hazard a guess, the actors are not really given the proper space or knowledge to interact with their environment, or even know what it is they should be reacting to. So I find it questionable how much they were actually using the volume compared to just regular green screen, as the actors seem to have almost no clue what they're looking at half the time. And this is a common problem for Marvel movies. They have a history of not having pre-visualization done before the cameras even start rolling, let alone have it done in time to be used as the backdrop in the volume. And maybe I'm not giving them enough credit. Even if it was done, I'm not sure how these actors would have reacted to the shapeless blob that is the CGI in the quantum realm, which lacks any real cohesive and distinguishing vision. But poor design work and lackluster visual effects aside, it is the soundstage feel that plagues this entire movie. It reminds me of watching like a cheap episode of Doctor Who, but where that show, its cheapness is sort of part of its charm, here Disney has all the money in the world and not really any excuse. Why is every scene comprised of an actor walking into a very cheap, confined, and minimalist set with bad costumes and slightly out of focus CGI panoramas that tries to convince you that it's any bigger than, say, my living room? Additional COVID restrictions made it harder to shoot with large crowds in these bigger films and blockbusters. You could even see it on smaller TV shows, such as The Umbrella Academy, which really had to kind of shrink stuff down and make stuff really confined. But not being able to shoot in large crowds could explain why the extras in this film were so sparse when they were actually, rarely played by a physical actor. Most scenes seem really dedicated to trying to keep 4 people in the room at a given time, breaking up the cast into these easy bite-sized chunks. It even goes as far as to send the Wasp and her parents on this pointless side quest that could be entirely cut out of the movie and lose nothing. Poor Evangeline Lilly is given very little to work with here, and it makes you question why her character is even in the title or, frankly, in the film at all. With how restrictive and crappy the sets look, it seems like this was a very, very clear choice. Like they wanted to be able to make an entire blockbuster on the green screen and avoid any pandemic-era complications or any on-location shooting. This may have been a good idea at the time, but we are now leaving the pandemic era slowly, hopefully. Let's not jinx it. And it's going to be really clear which films had these huge restrictions put on them that forced them to be almost in this bottle and self-contained. And the results are a world that never really feels tangible, like something you could reach out and touch. It sucks the soul right out of the film to the extent that even Paul Rudd's lovable, goofy grin, it can't elevate the pure laziness of it. This leaves only Marvel's most cynical and formulaic elements at the forefront. But I don't want to seem I'm being too hard on it. There are some good things here. The cast is doing the best with what they are given, even if the Wasp is pushed to the side, and Cassie, unfortunately, ends up being really underdeveloped and sort of bland. Meanwhile, MODOK is reduced to nothing more than kind of one of the worst effects I've seen in a really long time, and nothing more than a butt of a joke that frankly just keeps repeating itself and isn't really all that funny. But again, it sounds like I'm being a negative Nancy. Back to the good stuff. Let's look at the real big positive here. Jonathan Majors as Kang carries this film. Every scene he is in is elevated, as he's the only one who really gets to approach this material with some sort of gravitas. And the movie does a good job with his origin story, almost to the detriment of everything else, as much of the second act is very Kang-focused. And I'm not going to complain about that much because this is the best part of the movie, so far be it from me to tell them to get rid of that. But I will say that sometimes his more heavy scenes conflict with the more jokey tone of the rest of the film. Yet it still is effective as a setup for the new big bad of the MCU, and if nothing else, I'm looking forward to Major's return in future projects. And I am avoiding big spoilers for this review, and I'm not going to get into any kind of specifics, just to let you know. But the third act does look like everything was generated in a computer. Because of course it was. But the big problem is at this point, they completely even gave up with minimal sets. This is just complete computer-generated, eye-gouging imagery that's very hard to follow, and everything is boring because nothing really looks real or convincing, so the stakes really don't translate that well. Add in a Deus Ex Machina from the ants, I think the film kind of forgot about them up until this point, and it seems like another case of Black Widow and Shang-Chi, with Marvel going for this overblown spectacle when the fight between two normal humans just sort of, punching each other out is far more interesting. Why? Because it has stakes we can understand and it looks real and tangible. It is actually making use of space and practical sets and its environment. This is what it comes down to for me. You can make a very CGI or entirely CGI movie look good. The Way of Water came out late last year, and that world felt really real and lived in because the characters were all well blocked and interacted in the world as if it were real. Their reactions felt authentic. Quantumania ain't no Way of Water. Here scenes are so poorly planned out and static, as if they expected the overworked CGI artists to do all the heavy lifting and make things interesting after the fact. And they're trying their hardest here. This is especially damning when the previous films in the Ant-Man series were all about utilizing the space, with the shrinking and growing scenes playing off the real-world environment. But here, in this quantum realm, there are few to no real-world elements to act as a point of reference for how big or small they really are. it all looks the same. There is one point in the film where two giant characters run up to one another and give each other a hug. And it took me a moment to remember they were giant because my brain had already, frankly, turned out the noise and couldn't instantly connect the visual dots. Now, my hope is that this is the end of the line for this sort of stuff. COVID restrictions are pretty well lifted at this point, and with luck, this is the last really lazy entry from the MCU, and they are now freed up to go back to form. One can only hope, because if the studio carries on this way, I'm not sure how much longer I could stand watching something this visually exhausting. But those are my thoughts on Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. If you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe. Until next time, keep those reels turning. Thank you.